Easter is supposed to be a time of joy, a time of family gatherings, egg hunts, and celebration. But behind the pastel colors and smiling bunnies lies a darker truth. Not every Easter memory ends with laughter. Some end in fear, blood, and terror that people never forget. Tonight, we'll uncover 3 disturbing TRO Easter horror stories that prove this holiday hides chilling nightmares. If you thought Easter was safe, think again. Every year, the small town came alive with Easter celebrations, and the egg hunt was the highlight for families. Parents brought their children dressed in bright spring colors, baskets in hand, as volunteers hid candy, filled eggs around the park, and into the edge of the surrounding woods. It was meant to be harmless fun, a tradition that had lasted for generations, and people trusted the routine so much that no one ever thought twice about letting their children wander a little farther into the trees to find a hidden prize. That year, the event seemed bigger than ever, with families from neighboring towns joining in, crowding the field with laughter and excitement. The organizers had promised the biggest hunt yet, with special golden eggs placed in more difficult spots. The children, fueled by competition and curiosity, scattered across the grounds, eager to be the first to find them. Among them was a group of kids who drifted near the tree line, where the grass grew uneven and shadows stretched longer even in daylight. One of the volunteers had supposedly hidden several eggs deeper in the woods to make the game more thrilling, and whispers spread quickly through the children about the possibility of finding the golden egg there. Without hesitation, a few adventurous kids pushed past the bushes, their baskets swinging as they disappeared into the undergrowth. Parents on the field barely noticed, distracted by conversations and the laughter of younger children. The hunt continued, with colorful eggs being discovered one after another, but the woods grew quieter as the kids inside pressed deeper, their laughter fading into uneasy silence. Minutes passed, and while some children returned triumphantly holding eggs, one did not. The golden egg rumor had kept him searching further than anyone else dared to go. His friends called his name but received no answer, and when one child claimed to have heard a scream, the others hesitated, unsure if it was part of the game or just their imagination. By the time adults realized that a child was missing, the festive mood had shifted into unease. Parents began shouting names, scanning the woods anxiously, and organizers hurried to reassure the crowd that everything was fine. Yet unease thickened in the air, as though the laughter and sunlight outside the trees had no power to reach the darkened paths within. The search for the missing boy quickly turned frantic as parents and volunteers scattered into the woods calling his name. What had started as a cheerful Easter morning now carried a suffocating weight, the sound of laughter replaced by the rustle of leaves and strained voices echoing through the trees. The once inviting forest seemed endless, with crooked branches and thick undergrowth concealing every corner, making the simple task of looking for a child feel overwhelming. Several children who had been near the woods claimed they saw him chasing after something shiny, maybe the golden egg everyone had whispered about, but none could remember where exactly he had gone. Fear spread quickly among the parents as they realized how far the woods stretched, reaching out to old abandoned trails that hadn't been used in years. The boy's mother was nearly hysterical, her voice cracking as she shouted for him, her pleas carrying through the forest in desperate waves. As the crowd grew more anxious, a few fathers took it upon themselves to go deeper than anyone else, venturing past the marked paths where the egg hunt was supposed to be confined. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the woods became. The cheerful decorations of the Easter event were left far behind, replaced by an eerie stillness broken only by their crunching footsteps. One of the men called out suddenly, saying he had found something. On the ground, nestled between roots, lay an Easter egg unlike the others. It wasn't the bright plastic kind filled with candy, but a real egg pale and streaked with something dark that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. The sight silenced them all, and one of the men quickly pocketed it, unsure what to make of it, but unwilling to leave it behind for the children to see. The discovery only fueled their urgency, and they pressed deeper, their flashlights cutting through the shadows as the daylight above seemed to dim under the canopy of branches. Back at the edge of the woods, panic had overtaken the event entirely. Some parents were ushering their children home, while others demanded the organizers call the police immediately. The once festive field was scattered with half-filled baskets forgotten in the chaos. The golden eggs that had been so highly anticipated now lay ignored, as though the entire tradition had been poisoned in a single moment. Every minute felt heavier than the last, and though searchers called the boy's name, until their voices were raw. The only answer they received was the unsettling silence of the woods around them. The woods had grown colder as the search stretched on, a strange chill settling over the area despite the warmth of the spring day. Parents and volunteers moved in groups, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the undergrowth as they searched desperately for any trace of the missing boy. Whispers of what had been found spread quietly among the adults. The strange egg, its surface cracked and stained, though no one dared say it too loudly for fear of alarming the children still lingering nearby. What unsettled everyone most was the way the woods seemed to swallow sound. Shouts and calls that should have carried easily through the trees seemed to vanish quickly, as though something unseen was absorbing them. More than one searcher admitted later that they felt as though they were being watched. Though no eyes could be seen in the shifting shadows between the trees, it was one of the older kids who claimed to have heard the first scream. He was trailing behind with a small group when a high-pitched sound tore through the woods, sharp and sudden, cutting through the silence. At first, some thought it was a prank, perhaps another child playing around to scare the others, but the tone of the scream had a rawness that left little room for laughter. The groups converged toward the sound, crashing through bushes and stumbling over roots, only to find emptiness. There was no child, no sign of movement, just broken branches and a trail of small footprints leading further into the trees. The prints seemed to stop suddenly, as though whoever had made them had been lifted off the ground mid-step. The eerie discovery only deepened the dread, and some parents began to refuse to go any further, convinced that something unnatural was at work. The police finally arrived, their flashing lights painting the edge of the forest in red and blue as officers began organizing the chaotic crowd. They urged parents to leave the area and try to restore order, but even their presence did little to calm the thick unease that clung to everyone. Officers entered the woods with search dogs, hoping they could pick up the boy's scent, but the animals grew agitated, whining and pulling at their leashes as if resisting the path ahead. What should have been a simple search for a lost child was turning into something far more sinister. And though no one wanted to admit it aloud, the feeling in the air suggested that the woods were hiding something no one was prepared to find. Night fell faster than anyone expected, the last rays of daylight swallowed by the thick canopy of trees as the search stretched into the evening. Flashlights bobbed through the woods like scattered fireflies, their narrow beams barely cutting into the growing darkness. The police expanded their efforts, marking sections of the forest with tape and sending teams deeper inside, while anxious parents lingered at the edge, refusing to leave until there was some sign of the missing boy. The festive music and decorations that had filled the park earlier now felt grotesque, remnants of a celebration that had curdled into horror. Half-filled baskets of candy lay abandoned in the grass, their bright plastic eggs glowing faintly under the harsh glare of police floodlights. The sounds of laughter and joy that had filled the morning had been replaced by murmured prayers, hushed sobs, and the clipped voices of officers trying to maintain control. Deeper in the woods, a team stumbled across something that brought the search to a halt. Scattered along a narrow dirt trail were more of the strange eggs. Real eggs, cracked and streaked with what appeared to be dried blood. Some were crushed underfoot, their shells splintered and leaking a foul-smelling residue, while others sat intact as though deliberately placed. The officers exchanged uneasy looks, unsure whether this was some twisted prank or a sign of something far more sinister. One officer picked up an unbroken egg and held it under his flashlight, only to recoil when he noticed the faint scratching marks etched into its surface, like claw marks too small to belong to an animal yet too precise to be random. The discovery was radioed in, but the response from the command post was clipped, urging them to press forward. Meanwhile, the search dogs continued to behave strangely, pulling away from the deeper trails and whining whenever they were urged onward. One dog reportedly froze completely, staring into the darkness ahead with its hackles raised, before letting out a low growl that unsettled even the seasoned officers. The handler struggled to move it, and eventually the team was forced to turn back, marking the trail for further investigation. At the same time, whispers spread among the volunteers who lingered near the police lines. Several people claimed they had seen movement just beyond the tree line, a tall figure that seemed to vanish whenever the flashlights swept across it. Though no one could confirm it, the descriptions were eerily similar. Something standing impossibly still, watching from the shadows, wearing what looked disturbingly like the outline of a rabbit's ears. The tension surrounding the search had reached a breaking point, by the time the figure was first clearly reported. A young teenager, lingering with a group of volunteers near the far side of the woods, claimed he saw someone standing between the trees, tall and motionless, with what looked like long ears stretching upward from its head. At first, adults dismissed it as hysteria, an illusion born from exhaustion and fear. But when two other people claimed to have seen the same thing, the mood shifted from anxious hope to pure dread. The idea of someone deliberately stalking the woods while a child was missing unsettled everyone in ways they couldn't ignore. Officers swept the area with flashlights, calling out warnings and demanding whoever was there show themselves. But each time the lights moved, the figure was gone. What made it worse was that those who saw it swore it never walked away. It simply wasn't there anymore once the light hit. Reports spread quickly across the search groups, and soon, parents were clutching their children tighter, refusing to let them out of sight even for a second. Whispers began about local legends, stories of someone who once dressed in a rabbit costume to terrify children decades earlier, though no one could agree if it had been a prankster or something darker. The officers grew frustrated with the rumors, but even they couldn't dismiss the growing number of witnesses who described the same eerie presence. One of the policemen muttered under his breath that the figure wasn't moving like a person at all, that the stillness of it felt unnatural, like a statue in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then came the discovery that silenced everyone. Near the banks of a shallow creek deep in the woods, a group stumbled across another egg. Unlike the others, this one was split cleanly in half, its insides hollowed out. But placed neatly in the center was something that froze the blood of every searcher. A small piece of fabric, clearly torn from a child's shirt. The colors matched the clothing the missing boy had been wearing that morning, and the sight of it confirmed everyone's worst fears. Officers quickly roped off the area, pushing people back as the boy's parents collapsed, their cries echoing into the night. The discovery transformed the search into something far more grim, no longer a hunt for a lost child, but an investigation into something none of them could fully understand. The creek became the new center of attention, as officers focused their search around the area where the torn piece of fabric was found. Floodlights were set up, casting harsh white beams across the water and illuminating the tangled roots and slick stones along the banks. The crowd of volunteers was pushed back, but many refused to leave, their faces pale as they watched the professionals move in with deliberate caution. The boys' parents clung to one another, voices breaking as they begged the officers to find their child. The woods, once so familiar and harmless, seemed to twist into something alien under the glare of artificial light, every shadow carrying the suggestion of hidden movement. The smell of damp earth filled the air, heavy and suffocating, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Search dogs were brought to the creek, their handlers urging them to pick up the boy's scent, but their behavior became more troubling than before. Instead of following a trail, the animals froze, whining and backing away from the water, as though something unseen was standing in their path. One of the dogs snapped at its leash, eyes fixed on the dark water, before its handler quickly pulled it back. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, and some of the volunteers whispered about the possibility that the figure seen earlier had led the boy here deliberately. The suggestion lingered, unspoken by the police but heavy in the minds of everyone watching. A deeper search along the creek revealed more of the unsettling eggs. Some were half buried in the mud, others perched unnaturally in the crooks of roots, or balanced on stones, as though carefully placed by unseen hands. Unlike the earlier finds, these eggs were fresher, their surfaces damp, and several emitted a faint, metallic smell that made those nearby gag. When one officer cracked open a shell for examination, what spilled out was not yolk or blood, but a small tuft of hair clumped with dirt, unmistakably human. The discovery was quickly concealed, but word spread regardless, infecting the crowd with a new level of terror. As the search dragged on, more witnesses swore they caught glimpses of the tall figure in the distance, always on the other side of the creek, always still, as if waiting. Each account described the same thing: the silhouette of a man, too tall, with ears or horns rising from his head, vanishing the moment the light struck where he stood. Officers tried to dismiss it as nerves and imagination, but no one could ignore the growing certainty that the boy was no longer alone in those woods. The search along the creek continued into the early hours of the morning, fatigue wearing down both officers and volunteers, but no one dared to leave. The woods were thick with unease, and every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sent nerves jolting through the searchers. The strange placement of the eggs had already disturbed them, but what came next unsettled them far more. One officer, following a narrow trail leading away from the creek, discovered something partially buried in the soil, a child's shoe, caked with mud, its laces torn. It was quickly confirmed as belonging to the missing boy. The air seemed to tighten with grief and dread as the item was bagged as evidence, the reality settling in that the search was shifting toward recovery rather than rescue. Parents who had lingered on the edges began breaking down, their hope collapsing as the night stretched on without answers. The figure, however, continued to haunt those who stayed. Multiple people, including 2 officers, swore they saw it standing at the far end of a clearing, the outline of its elongated ears visible even in the faint light. One described it as impossibly tall, its posture unnervingly rigid, as if it were waiting for them to make the next move. When flashlights were aimed toward it, the beam seemed to hit only empty air, the figure gone in an instant. Some argued it was just the play of shadows, but the consistency of the descriptions made denial harder each time. The silence following each sighting was worse than the fear itself, leaving everyone with the sense that they were being herded deeper into a place they didn't belong. Tension escalated further when a scream ripped through the night, echoing across the treetops. It wasn't the playful shriek of a child, but a raw, piercing cry that froze the searchers where they stood. The source couldn't be pinpointed, and when they rushed toward the sound, all they found were more eggs scattered along the ground, forming a crude path deeper into the forest. Some of the volunteers refused to follow, claiming it was a trap, while the officers pressed forward reluctantly, their radios crackling with static as communication faltered. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became, trees gnarled as though twisted by unseen hands, the air colder and heavier, the darkness thicker than it should have been for a spring night. The festive spirit that had once filled the day was a distant memory, replaced by a primal fear that gripped every heart still walking those trails. The scream lingered in the air long after it had faded, and every searcher carried its echo in their chest as they moved forward into the woods. The path of eggs that led them deeper felt deliberate, almost mocking, each one gleaming faintly in the beam of a flashlight before crunching underfoot. Officers tried to stay composed, instructing the group to spread out carefully, but their clipped tones betrayed their unease. Radios continued to malfunction, cutting out in bursts of static whenever anyone tried to report in, leaving the search teams feeling more isolated with every step. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to change, the trees pressing close together, as if funneling them in a single direction. Even the air felt unnatural, thick, damp, and colder than it should have been, like stepping into a place not entirely their own. One officer noticed strange markings on several tree trunks, long vertical slashes that didn't look like they had been made by any animal known to the region. The gouges were too precise, evenly spaced, and in some cases, high above the ground, as if something had dragged claws through the bark, while standing taller than any person should. Volunteers whispered nervously about the sightings of the figure, and some began refusing to continue. Despite pleas and warnings, a handful turned back toward the main road, unwilling to risk following a trail that seemed designed to lure them into danger. Those who pressed on did so with tightening throats and trembling hands. The search dogs were released again, but their behavior grew stranger. Instead of pulling forward, they circled in place, barking furiously at the darkness between the trees, then whining and attempting to retreat. One broke free from its handler and sprinted into the woods, only for its frantic barking to stop abruptly moments later, swallowed by silence. The handler's calls went unanswered, and no trace of the animal was found despite a quick sweep of the area. The absence left an unsettling void that none of the officers could explain. Then the sightings began again, closer this time. Several beams of light caught glimpses of movement in the distance. Something tall and still, its outline disturbingly clear before vanishing again. A child's laugh echoed faintly in the distance, light and playful, yet impossibly out of place in the dead silence of the forest. It drifted through the trees, luring the searchers onward, the sound twisting between innocence and menace, with every step they took deeper into the shadows. The laughter that drifted through the woods unsettled everyone, a sound so innocent it became grotesque against the backdrop of fear that had consumed the night. Some insisted it had to be the missing boy, calling his name desperately into the darkness, while others whispered that it didn't sound right, that the cadence of it was too deliberate, almost mocking. The search party pressed deeper, guided by the faint echoes, until the path of eggs reappeared once more, this time arranged in a perfect circle at the base of a massive oak tree. No one wanted to step into it, though several officers reluctantly crossed the boundary, shining their lights upward. The trunk was scarred with more claw-like slashes, and near the roots lay scraps of fabric, damp and clinging to the soil, unmistakably torn from children's clothing. The boy's mother, who had followed despite warnings, collapsed at the sight, her cries swallowed by the oppressive hush of the forest. Tension spiked when one of the volunteers swore he saw movement in the branches above. Flashlights whipped upward. But there was nothing, only twisting limbs stretching against the night sky. Yet several swore they had seen something pale hanging there for just a second, something that shifted as though climbing. The officers ordered everyone back, drawing their weapons despite the uncertainty of what they faced. Fear spread quickly through the group, and murmurs of leaving altogether began to grow louder. But before they could retreat, the sound of footsteps circled them, crunching leaves and twigs with deliberate slowness, too heavy to belong to a child. Every flashlight swung outward, catching only fragments. What looked like a hand retreating behind a trunk, a shadow slipping between branches, the outline of those dreadful ears flickering in and out of view. One officer radioed for backup, but again only static hissed in reply. Panic broke when a volunteer screamed, pointing toward the edge of the circle of eggs, where a tall figure stood, still as stone, its elongated ears rising above its head. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its sheer size made the group recoil, several stumbling backward in terror. The lights hit at full force, and in an instant it was gone, as though it had never been there. Shouts erupted, orders to hold the line clashing with pleas to flee, the crowd fracturing into chaos as the sense of control finally shattered. The latter came again, closer now, threading through the trees like a taunt, daring them to keep going even as every instinct screamed to turn back. Chapter 10 begins with the woods, closing in around what remained of the search party, exhaustion and fear weighing heavier than the night itself. Some volunteers had fled, others were too frightened to move, leaving only the boy's parents, a few officers, and a handful of determined locals pressing on. The circle of eggs had shattered their nerves, and yet the laughter that drifted deeper into the forest acted like a lure they couldn't ignore. They followed reluctantly, their flashlights flickering in the suffocating dark, until they stumbled upon a clearing that seemed unnaturally perfect, as if carved out by hands rather than nature. At its center stood a crude wooden cross, wrapped in strips of fabric eerily similar to the child's clothes, and at its base lay a basket of eggs. These were not the brightly painted treasures of a holiday celebration. Their shells were cracked and mottled, leaking foul, smelling fluid that seeped into the grass. The boy's shoe rested at the top of the pile, placed deliberately as if on display. His mother collapsed to her knees, screaming his name into the emptiness, her voice cracking under the weight of horror. Before anyone could move, the sound of crunching leaves spread across the clearing, and once again the towering figure appeared. Tall, lean, its silhouette monstrous beneath the pale moonlight. The long ears jutting from its head seemed grotesque, more bone than fabric, as though it were not a costume at all. The figure stood in silence, its presence enough to root everyone to the ground. Then, just as suddenly, it retreated into the tree line, vanishing as if the forest itself had swallowed it whole. The officers rushed forward, guns raised, but found nothing except the chilling aftermath, the eggs now gone, the basket overturned, and the wooden cross bear stripped clean in seconds. The boy was never found. Search teams scoured the woods for weeks, but all that was recovered were fragments of eggshells and reports of fleeting sightings of the same figure lurking at a distance. The town buried its hope along with its trust in Easter traditions, and the annual egg hunt was abandoned forever. To this day, locals warn children never to wander too far into the woods on Easter weekend, for fear of meeting the thing that wears the rabbit's face. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your time means everything to me, and I truly appreciate you joining me on these chilling journeys into the unknown. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true tales. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the scariest stories are often the ones closest to home.